Warm greetings. Welcome to Heart Stories. May you find yourself and healing through the stories we share. Now, let the journey begin.
Most weddings begin with laughter. This one began with a song only the dead would know. Elias, a 35-year-old music teacher, stood at the edge of a windswept shore, his hands trembling slightly as he smoothed the lapels of his pale linen suit. He wasn't nervous because he doubted the love he shared with Darren. No, this day was long overdue. 7 years of building something honest, something sacred despite the world telling them they didn't deserve it. There were no parents in the crowd, no tearful mothers or proud fathers, only a half circle of close friends, those who had stood beside them through years of quiet battles and invisible bruises. The ceremony was meant to be simple, intimate, a quiet celebration beside the sea, under open skies, away from the noise of disapproval. The kind of wedding where the vows meant more than the venue. But just as the officiant opened her book to speak, the sound of small footsteps came from the side gate. 3 children walked in slowly, calmly, as if the moment had been rehearsed 1,000 times in their dreams. They were identical, same eyes, same hair, same delicate posture. They didn't belong to any guest Elias recognized. No one moved. The only sound was the ocean's breath and the faint crunch of grass beneath their sneakers. One of them looked up, wide-eyed, and asked the quietest question, "Mister, can we sing?" It wasn't the kind of interruption anyone had planned for, yet something about their stillness, their shared expression silenced any objection. No one knew what to say, so no one said anything. Then they began to sing, 3 soft voices, innocent, high-pitched, slightly off-key, in the way only children can be blended into a lullaby. A simple melody, gentle and raw. The words were in no language the crowd could place, but Elias knew every note, every syllable, every pause. His breath caught in his chest. That song, he had written it as a teenager. Back when he lived in the cold dormitory of a state-run orphanage, he wrote it on the back of an old homework sheet with a broken pencil. He never performed it, never published it, never hummed it again, not even in private. Only one person ever heard it, River. The boy who used to sleep on the bunk below the boy who used to hold his hand beneath the blanket when the nights grew too long. The boy who once whispered, "Someday, when we're older, we'll raise kids and sing to them before bed." River, who vanished one morning without a note, without goodbye, without a trace. Elias's knees nearly gave out. Darren reached for him, but Elias couldn't move. He could only watch as the final note of the song faded into the wind. The children finished their lullaby and stood quietly, looking at him as if waiting for recognition, as if returning something that had always belonged to him. And in that moment, Elias knew this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a charming interruption or an eerie chance. This was River. Somehow, somewhere in the spaces between them, in the voices of those children, River had found his way back. And just like that, the ceremony paused, not because of disruption, but because the past had come home not knocking, but singing. As the guests sat in stunned silence, Elias realized the past didn't need an invitation. It would find you anyway, through voices, memories, or melodies buried in forgotten notebooks. And sometimes, love has a way of echoing back, not in the way you expect, but in the way your soul remembers. If this story has you holding your breath, don't exhale just yet. There's more to uncover. Follow us at Heart Story for the rest of Elias's journey, where love, memory, and truth meet at the edge of the sea. The moment their voices fell silent, a quiet tension settled over the wedding. Not the kind born of scandal or confusion, but something far older, something sacred. Elias couldn't move. His legs, rooted in sand and disbelief, felt colder than the breeze coming off the water. The children stood in place, eyes fixed on him, not demanding, not expecting, just waiting. Then, the smallest one took a cautious step forward. He reached into the pocket of his navy blazer, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and held it out like a fragile offering. His voice was soft, barely more than breath. "Daddy River used to sing that song to us every night," he said. "He told us he didn't write it. He was just keeping it safe for the person who did." The paper slipped from Elias's fingers the moment he took it. The children didn't stay long in the spotlight. Darren, sensing the rising tide in Elias's chest, gently guided them toward a side room to rest. The guests murmured among themselves, unsure whether to stay seated or follow. But Elias remained still, shoulders slumped, gaze lost somewhere past the sea. That song, those children, that name, River, once, in the cold silence of their shared bunk. River had whispered dreams into the cracks of Elias's broken faith. He said they'd escape the orphanage together, build a life, make a home, raise children who never had to know what it meant to be thrown away. Elias had believed him. And then River vanished. No warning, no goodbye, no reason. For years, Elias told himself that River had been adopted, that maybe he'd found a family who promised something better and didn't look back, that maybe, somewhere, River had chosen survival over sentiment. But now, River was everywhere. In the voices of those children, in the song Elias thought had been buried with his youth, in the gaze of a boy too young to lie but too certain to be mistaken. It wasn't just the melody that shook him. It was the memory of the person who held it last. Someone who hadn't been erased, but preserved, revered, remembered. Later that evening, Elias sat alone with the paper. His fingertips brushed the penciled lyrics, the ones he had scrawled in the dark with a broken stub on a wrinkled exam sheet, believing no one would ever see them again. How had River kept them? Why it felt impossible. And yet, the evidence was singing and breathing and calling him Mister. He didn't cry. Not yet. The grief hadn't found the right key to open him up. But something deeper stirred. Not mourning, not joy. Something else entirely, a quiet ache that maybe he hadn't been forgotten after all. Elias had spent years building a life that didn't include the past. He had learned how to survive without explanation. But as the sun set behind the ocean and the children's song echoed in his mind, he realized the past hadn't abandoned him. It had been waiting in lullabies, in bedtime stories, in voices shaped by someone who once made a promise under a thin blanket in a cold room. There are reunions without handshakes, homecomings without doors. And sometimes, the people who disappear leave behind something stronger than presence, remembrance. Love doesn't always return in the form we expect. It may never knock again, but it sings, it echoes. And in the voices of three children with the same eyes, the same face, the same quiet knowing River had returned, not to reclaim the past, but to honor it. And perhaps the most powerful kind of love isn't the one that stays, but the one that carries a piece of you forward, long after you've stopped walking beside it. The house was quiet that evening. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, his wedding suit still creased from the long day. The ceremony hadn't continued. No vows had been exchanged, no rings traded, and yet, it didn't feel like a failure. It felt unfinished. Darren walked in with a soft knock. In his hands, a worn-out backpack. One of the children had left it behind in the side room. He placed it on the bed next to Elias, unzipped it slowly, and pulled out a document sealed in a plastic sleeve, yellowed, carefully folded, and clearly treasured. On the front, in handwriting Elias hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, were the words, "For Elias, if the kids ever find you." His breath caught. The letter was long, written in River's neat, rounded script. It began without apology, without excuses, only truth. River hadn't left because he stopped loving Elias. He left because love alone wasn't enough to outrun what was inside him. He had been diagnosed with congenital heart failure shortly after his last health screening at the orphanage. It was terminal, a slow fade. The kind of disease that doesn't announce itself loudly, but rather whispers you into a quieter version of yourself. River had made a decision, one that no teenager should have had to make. He didn't want Elias to watch him wither. He didn't want their memories to be tainted by hospital rooms and oxygen tanks. He wanted Elias to remember him strong, defiant, full of impossible dreams. So he left without a word. He survived longer than anyone expected, found a job, rented a small apartment, and volunteered at a hospital where he met 3 newborns abandoned in the NICU. Triplets, fragile but fighting. River named them, raised them, loved them. He sang them the lullaby Elias had written, cooked them the cheap, warm meals they used to dream about together. He showed them how to fold paper cranes and told them stories about a boy who once saved him with music. In the final paragraph, River wrote, "I didn't get the years I wanted with you, but I tried to live a life that honored what we once dreamed about. I couldn't be your partner, Elias, but maybe they can be your family." There was no date at the end, no return address, just a small ink smudge, like someone had touched the paper while still crying. Elias held the letter to his chest. The children weren't just echoes of a past life. They were River's final vow, a living legacy built from borrowed time and fearless love. In that quiet room, the pieces began to fall into place. The melody sung at the wedding wasn't a random echo, it was a thread, a connection. The lullaby wasn't just remembered, it had become a ritual, a bridge between two lives that had never fully disconnected. River hadn't left Elias behind. He had carried him forward, in stories, in songs, in the way he tucked his children in each night with a name they had never met but always known. The sun had set by the time Elias folded the letter and placed it back in its sleeve. He stared out the window at the distant shore where the ceremony had begun that morning, now only marked by footprints and folding chairs. There was no music now, just silence, the kind of silence that follows truth. He had lost River once, but this time, he had something to hold on to. Grief doesn't always wear black. Sometimes it arrives with a child's voice, a bedtime song, or a sealed envelope waiting in a backpack. Sometimes love leaves not to be forgotten, but to leave something better behind. And maybe the most selfless kind of love is the one that lets go not to disappear, but to return in a form strong enough to outlive even the body it once belonged to. The house felt different now. The quiet no longer resembled emptiness. It felt like anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to begin. The wedding had paused, but Elias and Darren didn't. They didn't wait for the next ceremony or for some official to confirm what they already knew. The very next day, they filed the paperwork for temporary guardianship. The forms were long, the questions invasive, but Elias didn't flinch. Darren stood beside him, steady and unwavering. The children came home with them that same evening. At first, the house wasn't ready. There were no extra beds, no toys, no bedtime routines. Just two men, 3 small suitcases, and decades of silence finally breaking open. But over time, gentle and gradual, something bloomed. The children, still adjusting, began to speak more. Not in a rush, not all at once, but through stories, moments, glimpses. They told Elias that River had taught them to bake his cinnamon rolls were always a little burnt at the edges. He made picture books out of scrap paper, each page drawn with a shaky hand and a patient heart. He showed them how to hum to plants while watering them, how to braid each other's hair, and how to listen to music not just with their ears, but with their whole bodies. And then one afternoon, one of them pointed to a framed photo sitting on Elias's piano, his graduation portrait taken years ago before the gray at his temples, before Darren, before he knew how many pieces he could survive being broken into. "We've seen him before," the child said. "That's the picture Daddy River kept on his bookshelf, right next to the stories he wrote but never finished." Elias didn't speak, couldn't. They led him upstairs, into the guest room. From their backpack, they pulled out a smaller frame, worn, cracked at the corners, the glass taped to hold it together. Same photo, same smile. His beneath it, written in faded marker, the person Daddy once loved the most. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the barely there sounds of children breathing nearby. Elias knelt and placed the newer frame beside the old one. For a brief moment, time folded in on itself. 2 rooms, 2 versions of the same man, connected by a memory and a promise that had crossed more than just years. That night, Elias read a story aloud for the children, seated on pillows clustered like a makeshift nest. It was one River had started characters without names, plot without end, but Elias recognized the rhythm in the sentences. The same rhythm in River's letters, the same rhythm in his lullaby. When he reached the final page, one of the children leaned closer and whispered. Daddy River said, "We were born to bring something back to you." "Do you know what it is?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at them at their matching faces. their searching eyes, their small hands curled like rivers when he used to sleep. Then he reached out and held them close. "It's a promise," he said. A promise he didn't get to keep. And somehow, that answer felt right. It wasn't about replacing anyone. It wasn't about recreating a past. It was about stepping into the unfinished spaces with courage and claiming the responsibility of love that was never allowed to grow old. Because fatherhood wasn't a matter of biology. It wasn't sealed by DNA or names on a certificate. It was in the way you show up, even when you're broken, in how you choose to stay, even when you're unsure, in how you take a history soaked in sorrow and choose to build something softer from it. Sometimes, family arrives unannounced, not because you planned for it, but because love decided you were ready to try again. 1 month later, the chairs returned to the shore. This time, there were more of them. The guest list had quietly grown not from invitations, but from hearts that had been waiting for their moment to come forward. The wedding of Elias and Darren was held again, under the same sky, beside the same sea. But it was no longer a ceremony to mark the beginning of a marriage. It was a gathering to honor everything that had led them here. Grief, love, memory, and now, legacy. The children wore soft gray suits with little boutonnieres that matched the groom's. They giggled as they walked down the aisle, one after another, carrying the rings with the kind of importance only children can hold without breaking. The moment the vows were spoken, the air shifted. The officiant declared their union, and as applause rose and the ocean whispered its own rhythm behind them, a woman stood up from the last row. She was older, dressed modestly. A trembling hand clutched a worn envelope. She stepped forward, past the rows of friends and well-wishers, her eyes wet but steady. Elias watched her approach, something in her face eerily familiar yet clouded by time. When she reached the altar, she spoke with a voice not much louder than the waves behind her. "I'm sorry for interrupting," she said, "but I need to give you this." Inside the envelope were 3 birth certificates, 3 names, 3 dates, each marked with the same Father River, folded beside them, a letter, not from River, but from her. "I'm his mother," the letter began. The words wavered across the page, part confession, part apology. She had once thrown her son out of the house the moment she discovered he was gay. She never looked back, never reached out, not even when he got sick, not even when he began to write letters he never sent. But one day, she found them tucked away in a storage box in her attic, hidden between books and old report cards, letters addressed to Elias. Full of memories, songs, hopes, and sorrow, and suddenly, the boy she had turned away no longer seemed like a stranger to her. He seemed like someone she had failed to love. At the end of the letter, a handwritten postscript. "I know I cannot ask for forgiveness, but if there's still room in the life he wanted to build, I hope to be a small part of it." Tears filled her eyes as she folded the paper back and looked at Elias, not pleading, not expecting, just waiting. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elias stepped forward. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He opened his arms, and she stepped into them, trembling like someone who had been cold for a very long time and had finally found warmth again. Behind them, the 3 children watched, and in the golden light of a late afternoon sun, Elias saw something he hadn't imagined possible: a family unfinished, unconventional, but healing. One choice at a time, they took a photo together that evening. 2 grooms, 3 children, and a grandmother who had once slammed a door, but now stood with them beneath the open sky. Not every ending is clean. Not every wrong can be undone. But some bridges, even the burned ones, can be rebuilt not to erase the fire, but to cross over it together, because forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, but it does change the future. And sometimes, it's the love we thought was gone forever that returns in the most unexpected ways through children, through songs, and even through those we once gave up on. What would you do if a stranger showed up with your past in their hands? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moves something inside you, follow Heart Story for more true-to-the-heart tales that remind us love always finds a way back.